Hello everybody, Ben Potter here, and welcome to this week's episode of Potter Talks Sport. After the last podcast about Saudi Arabian influence within sports, I did get a lot of requests to do one on agenda setting in the media in relation to gender. Today, I'll take a look at how sports are reported on and viewed depending on gender. Does gender make a difference, or is it all just myths and lies? Let's get into it. Agenda setting is the concept that applies to any and every form of media, whether it's mainstream news seen on the TV, social media such as Instagram and X, or even print media like newspapers and magazines, it still applies. Before I do go any further though, some of you may not know what agenda setting actually is, so here's a quick definition. Agenda setting is the process of the mass media presenting certain issues frequently and prominently, with the result that large segments of the public come to perceive those issues as more important than others. This is basically trying to say that the media will show some things more than others to influence the way in which we think. As I said earlier, I'm going to focus specifically on agenda setting in terms of gender, so I'll look at things such as the frequency and quality of the media around men's and women's sports, so that I can make a comparison. Academic research has said that sports fans, athletes and administrators discriminate against female athletes, and that many sports fans aren't even interested in watching women's sports. This is supported by Miller, who says that a study by USC or Purdue University found that 95% of all TV sports coverage within the US was of men's sport compared to only 5% which was represented by women's sports. And to back that up, within the UK, research by YouGov found that 78% of people who responded watched more men's sports compared to only 2% who watched more women's sports. Then 17% was made up of people who watched both men's and women's sports equally, and 2% were unsure. Linking this back to agenda setting, the same study showed that 31% of respondents said that they don't engage with women's sport as they struggle to even find coverage. To me, that seems like the media are directing us towards men's sport over women's intentionally, as they're promoting men's sport much more. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Also, when looking at a selection of tweets and posts by Sky Sports, take a guess at which was referred to more, the Premier League or the WSL. If you guessed the Premier League, you'd be correct. Out of all the tweets referring to the Premier League and the WSL, Premier League was mentioned 68% of the time compared to the WSL, which was only mentioned 32% of the time. Then, if you look at another broadcaster, BT Sports' tweets in July of 2022, out of 139, only 12 of them focus on women's sports. 12, all of which are on UFC and wrestling. That clearly shows an agenda, as not only is the sports selection limited, but only 12, very little number. This shows a drastic contrast between the coverage of men's and women's sports. Even when women's sports do get covered as well, agenda setting still occurs. This applies to things such as the Olympics. Even when the female sports get lots of coverage, the media still tries to sway our way of thinking. Davis found that 75% of coverage during the women's section of the Olympics in 2008 was devoted to women's sports such as gymnastics, swimming, diving and beach volleyball, very traditional ones. In these events, Davis says it's customary for women participating to wear the equivalent of a bathing suit, supporting the idea that these sports are popular only due to sex appeal. This shows that if women's sports aren't considered stereotypically feminine, then they won't receive coverage, and as Davis said, if they venture from that space, they risk being shunned. However, since events such as the Women's Euros in 2022, there has been an increase in viewership and broadcasting and coverage of women's football. The Women's Sports Trust did a study in 2022, finding that 16% of coverage hours on BBC One, BBC Two, Channel 4, ITV and Sky Sports main event were dedicated to women's sport between January to July of 2022, in comparison to 9% in 2021. With 21% of the viewing hours being for women's sport in 2022, contrasting 10% in the previous year. So as you can see, there is a clear agenda within the media that favours men's sports over women's. This is seen across the frequency and volume of men's sport that is covered and broadcast compared to women's. However, this isn't to say that things aren't changing. As I mentioned before, there is a light at the end of the tunnel for the broadcasting of women's sports, such as events like the Euros having a massive impact on the audience for women's sport and increase the coverage too. Thanks for watching today's episode. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe and hit that notification button as well, so you'll never miss another video. See you in the next one.